coffee hour. Happy International Women's Day to all the women that's here in Zoom. Thanks for all your appreciation. I hope you enjoyed this weekend, and today we have a presentation about Brazil. So first of all, to be a little bit interactive, I would like to know, just really quick, what do you know about Brazil? For example, in my case, I know that it has a good soccer team, and it's also a big country, so I know in Zoom, the people, what do you know about Brazil? You can open your mic, put it in the chat. Here also, what do you know about Brazil? A little thing, if any. Okay, the statue is from Brazil. Okay, sounds good. What else? What else do you know? You can put it in the chat.
They speak Portuguese, right?
Yeah, okay, that they speak Portuguese. Okay, yeah, they are good ideas. What we have on Zoom also. So yeah, well, we are going to explore more, but first of all, I'm going to pass the mic to Marcela for some quick announcements.
Happy Tuesday to everyone. Short announcement, this week we do have a program in Brazil. So for those students watching, if you're interested to study abroad in Brazil, we do have a program. I will put the link in the chat, but also if you're here, come and see me in the table after the program. I'm sure that you're gonna fall in love with Brazil. So hopefully you enjoying the spring semester. We have few more presentations in March. We're very thankful that we just have one missing presentation for May, and we're looking for an Asian country. So if you want to present, and we have one slot left for May. And now I'm going to pass the mic back to Mateo.
All right, so right now we are going to present our speaker. He's from Brazil. He holds a master's degree in plant science. He's studied at Fresno State, and right now he's on his first semester on his MBA. He's passionate about language, maps, flags, and culture. So let's welcome Mauricio Almeida. Thanks for being here, for presenting with us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hello. Did you know that 18,000 people from all over the world visit Brazil every single day? Wow. And in this presentation, I want to show you why. But first, another question. It's nice to see that some people already knew some facts about Brazil, but here's another one. Do you know what the capital of Brazil is?
São Paulo.
São Paulo, okay. Anybody else? It is actually Brasilia.
Did they change it?
And it was a city that was made specifically, or was designed specifically to be the capital of the country, and it was designed in the shape of an airplane. Looks more like a bird to me, but who am I? If we could describe Brazil with one word, I don't know why you would, but if you want to, it would be diversity. Diversity of people, cultures, food, and everything under the sun. Brazil is the only country in the American continent that speaks Portuguese. And I have some of my favorite words in Portuguese. My favorite words are obrigado and abacaxi. Do you want to know what they mean?
Yes.
Obrigado means thank you. And abacaxi means pineapple. But let's talk a little bit about the economy of Brazil. Brazil is self-sufficient in energy production. Yeah, but 64% of the entire country's energy in 2019 was from high electricity. So very heavy on the eco-friendly type of energy production. There's a lot of fossil fuels, but wind farms are growing in the country as well. Biofuel. No pure gasoline car were sold in Brazil after 1976. Brazil invests heavily on ethanol production, and ethanol in Brazil is made out of sugarcane. So you can convert a whole field of sugarcane into fuel for your car.
We need that now. But it's going to go so high. Sorry.
Brazil is one of the 10 largest GDP countries in the world. Part of that, 66% of that is in service, industry, and a large agricultural production. Did you know that Brazil also have a space program? It's true. There's even a Brazilian astronaut that spent some time in the ISS, International Space Station, a few years ago. And now, Brazil is one of the countries that signed the NASA Artemis Accord, the same program that NASA is working on to take men or humans back to the moon. Isn't that exciting? Oh, and I forgot one thing. Brazil also have a very large airplane manufacturer that manufactures airplanes for several different companies around the world. And one more thing about the economy. Brazil uses a unified health system or universal health care. So anybody that needs to can go and get medical attention without having to pay much or sometimes anything for medical care. But now to the fun stuff. Brazil is big, really big, gigantically big. I believe that it is the 5th largest country by area after Russia, Canada, China, and the US. It's way bigger than Texas. And it's formed of 5 different distinct regions. And each one of them is completely different from the other in all different aspects. In the landscape, in the population, in the language, in the culture, in the architecture. Let's start with the north. It's where the Amazon is. But don't be fooled. There's no free two-day shipping at this place. The Amazon holds one of the largest amount of species, animal species and biodiversity in the world. And tribes of indigenous people and water. A lot of the fresh water in the world is in the Amazon. Brazil also has the most national parks in the Americas. 72 total. And the massive majority of those are in the north. Brazil is in South America. You know, like America, just south. Let's talk about Midwest. The Brazilian Midwest has a vast amount of animal life and biolife and plants, second only to the Amazon. There's more animal and plant species than anywhere else in the world. It's where humans and animals and plants share resources and live together. The Brazilian Midwest is one of the most beautiful places that I ever seen. Oh, and they also like country music for some reason.
How do you know?
It's very popular. The country music in that portion of the country, it's very popular. It's more Brazilian style of country music. Now let's go a little bit east, to the northeast, and also a huge influence of the Portuguese architecture and African cultures in the northeast of Brazil. And some of these places in the northeast look out of this world. Like I said, the architecture of the northeast is beautiful, and there is a mix of old and new that makes it the ideal place for tourists to choose the first time they visit the country. So that is a little bit of a style of music very popular in the northeast of Brazil. It's a band called Oladum, and back in the 90s, they had a whole project, music with Michael Jackson when he was in Brazil. So it's a very, very popular and very catchy. I even have to hold myself from start dancing when they play. And then on to the Southeast. The Southeast is probably where most people associate with Brazil. And most people know about Brazil because of the Southeast. Large cities, strong industry, and like any other large cities, a high blood pressure inducing traffic. Brazil has pretty good public transportation in the Southeast as well. It's where cities like Rio and São Paulo are. So most of what you see about Brazil on the internet or on TV sometimes come from the Southeast. Surfing, carnival, all very common practices, very common activities in the Southeast of Brazil. Do you like cold? Welcome to the South. We're going to spend some time in the South now, because here's where I spend most of my life. The South is a place of cold weather, chocolate, and tea. But not sweet, because that's just wrong. As we talk about, every one of the 5 regions in Brazil is completely different from each other. And here's another one. But it's not always cold. There's a lot of natural and man-made beauties that can be enjoyed in the South as well, such as the Iguaçu Falls, with more than 275 falls, and some of them dropping more than 350 feet.
Wow.
The southern architecture. So the southern region of Brazil was colonized by Germans and Italians and Portuguese from the Azores. So a lot of the architecture that you will see will be influenced by the Germans and by the Italians and by all of the population that came from Europe in the 19th and the 20th century. That influence can be seen in the streets, in the houses, in the food, dances, in the language. It's still very common to see people in the streets speaking German, and there are some schools that still teach kids German. Myself, for instance, when I was in the kindergarten, I had classmates that didn't speak much Portuguese, because at home they would speak German. The Italian influence is pretty heavy in the South as well. A lot of the agriculture is in the wine industry and grape, but also general other crops like soybean and corn and wheat. There's even a chocolate festival in Brazil, very, very popular, where chocolatiers from all over, they compete to create very impressive sculptures out of chocolate. In every picture in this slide, you will see something made entirely of chocolate. From the bookshelf, to the White House, to the Egyptian pharaoh, to the Eiffel Tower. Everything here is made entirely of chocolate. Because of the long-lasting cattle drives that existed in the Pampas, or the south portion of Brazil, Uruguay, Paraguay, and Argentina, barbecue and beef jerky is very popular in these regions. But other foods as well that, like I said, were influenced by the Portuguese, or by the Germans, or by the Italians, and some local created foods. Here in California, in the Bay Area, we have pretty good Brazilian restaurants that you can enjoy some of this type of food. We used to have one in Clovis, but sadly, during the pandemic, it had to close down. Traditions and state pride. There's a lot of traditions in the South, but there's also the state pride over the country pride. I'm going to tell you a little story. Hundreds of years ago, the population of the South was tired of paying taxes to the North and some other regions. And they decided to revolt and split from the rest of the country. They lost the war. But if you walk in the streets in the South, in certain areas, you wouldn't think like it. Because people are still carrying the state flag. People are still very proud of the state accomplishment, and even of the war that we lost. People still dress the way that you see in the pictures. And that is not a custom. If you ask a gaucho, they will tell you it's not a custom, it's a way of life. Because it's very normal to see people dressed like that going to work, going to school, going to the store. So it's a normal part of the day. And there's another interesting phenomenon in the south of Brazil. It's something called Gaucho First, Brazilian Second. It's where people from the south portion of Brazil believe that they are gauchos, not Brazilians.
Is Gaucho considered like an ethnic?
Gaucho it's an ethnic, it's a portion of that region, because I think you still find gauchos in portions of other countries, like I said, Argentina and Uruguay as well. And it's more due to the clothing, the style of food, the type of music. So it's a culture of a region. And one of the things that I also noticed growing up, and even now, looking at new generations, is that every time I see a picture of a gaucho on the internet, on Instagram, anywhere in the world, they're usually carrying the state flag, almost never the country flag, including myself in San Francisco up there. It's usually the state flag that we carry, not the country flag. And also, hot tea, which is made out of dried out matcha tea leaf and is placed into a dried gourd, which is a little bit hard to explain, but you empty the gourd, you dry it out, you put matcha tea leaves inside, you stick a metal straw, a little bit of gold on top, I believe, and you put hot water and you share with your friends, with your family, or you can use it individually as well. I think it's more common now to be individual. But when I was a kid, a long, long time ago, it used to be a very communal type of activity. You would sit around a campfire or anywhere where your family was, and you drink tea together from the same gourd.
Is it similar to mate?
It's exactly mate, yes. I think the type of device that you use to drink it is slightly different, because in northern regions of Brazil, or northern than the state where I'm from, they drink cold tea. Also similar style, but it's cold instead of hot. And I'm going to go into an assumption here, and I imagine it's because of weather as well, because the weather is much warmer northern. But again, don't quote me on that. I still have well. Okay. But moving on, I believe that you can all guess that the number one sport in the country is football.
Oh, really?
But not that kind. Although we do know who Tom Brady is. Not for the reasons you would think though. But the type of sport that it's the number one in Brazil, of course. Is that kind. That's the number one sport in the country. Brazil is the only country in the world that holds 5 World Cup, until last time I checked. But there are other sports as well that are popular. There's something called beach soccer, volleyball, basketball, and one of my favorite Sunday morning was Formula One. It's also pretty popular. But the main reason for you to visit Brazil is its people. The diverse amount of cultures and people that are all over the country, in every region. You saw that the regions are different, but if you go and you have a chance to visit Brazil, you will see the same thing. Friendliness. Brazilians are very friendly people. They have a cheery disposition. They love visitors most of the time. And if you ask a Brazilian in the streets, hey, how are you doing? They will tell you. Thank you. So if you have any questions about Brazil or this presentation, I'm more than happy to answer.
In the beginning, you were talking about the juice from the corn had fuel. Could you tell a little bit about how many gallons or amount of the raw juice would be used to make how much of the fuel?
A gallon?
How
Yes.
much would be like a gallon of fuel would require how much juice?
Right. So it's actually from sugarcane.
Yes.
So very early on the presentation, I put a picture there because I want to talk a little bit about the energy consumption. My main area of study and work is agriculture. So the how can I say this? The sugar cane portion I understand, but after it leaves the field and it goes to the production, to the refinery, I'm not quite sure in terms of, and then I do understand your questions, like how much sugar cane do you need to produce 1 gallon of ethanol?
That goes through my mind because when I was a kid, I helped my dad make the juice and turn it into molasses and brown sugar. And my job was to put a certain amount of green wood with the dry wood so that it would regulate the heat in the different parts of the tank that was receiving the juice. And I remember that quite well.
Yes, very interesting. I kind of have a memory of producing molasses as well, and I always imagined that producing sugarcane might be slightly different, but the principle would be the same. You would have to remove all type of liquid from the sugarcane to produce. So I think you need a lot of biomass, a lot of sugarcane to produce 1 gallon of ethanol. But anything that I would say here would be wrong because I have no idea of.
I can understand that.
We have a question in the chat that says, how common the Spanish language is in Brazil?
Well, so the Spanish language, how can I say this too? It's more prevalent in the border states, so states that border Uruguay, Paraguay, Argentina. I don't know much about the north portion of Brazil in terms of the language, because I haven't been to most states in the north yet, but in the south there's something called the Castellano, which is spoken in both sides of the border by Brazilians and by the people on the other side as well. So one of the things that's pretty interesting about Brazil, and I actually did not include in this presentation, is that Brazil is part of something called the Mercosur, which is kind of like the European Union. So it's a trade bloc. And a lot of the population can move back and forth from one country to the other without much issue. So I would expect that up north is just as common as it is in the south. And I do have to make a disclaimer as well. I have been living outside of Brazil for quite a few years, so things might have changed since my time there. But I believe in general, especially now with a more globalized world, Spanish must be very popular. And if you go to Brazil and you speak Spanish, you would be fine. Because I think most Brazilians, at least we'd like to think that we understand Spanish.
Your major here at the university?
So I'm an MBA student right now. Yeah, I have a master's in plant science from Fresno State, but now I came back to get my MBA.
You just told us that you went to Brazil a few years ago the last time. What's the thing you miss more about Brazil? And how long would you like to go back again from now?
Yeah, so it's the thing that I think I miss the most is the food. That's why I recommended restaurants, because it's fun to go and to have Brazilian food. San Francisco has a very good Brazilian restaurant. When we had the one in Clovis, I used to go there. We had one in Vicente as well that I used to go. So I think the food would be probably the most, the thing that I miss the most for sure. Trips to Brazil I haven't done as often as I should. But now during the pandemic, it's a little bit harder to fly over. But I think, to answer your question, the thing that I miss the most is probably the food.
I know that sometimes for tourists is Rio de Janeiro or São Paulo. Have you visited there? What recommendations do you have about those cities?
Yes, so I've been to São Paulo. I spent some time, not a lot of time in São Paulo. Rio, I flew over and I stayed in the airport. So I never actually stepped out of the airport in Rio, so I'm not the right person to talk about Rio. But one of the things that I noticed while researching this presentation is that you can find a lot of good videos online on YouTube about Rio. There's a lot of people in Rio making videos and making instructions on what to do, what not to do, where to go, where not to go, because it is a large city. It's the same way as I would imagine the first time you go to LA or the first time you go to New York. It's a huge city, so it has beautiful places that you can go visit, but you have to know where to go. Do your research before you fly over, and you should be fine.
Do you recommend other cities that
Oh,
doesn't
definitely,
have their
definitely.
well known, but it will be very attractive?
Yes, so there's a city in the northeastern part, and I think you saw some pictures. I didn't put a lot of slides about the Northeast. And last time I did this presentation several years ago here at Fresno State, I had a partner from Brazil, and he was from the Northeast. So it was a much more complete presentation because he talked a lot about his state, which was in the Northeast. There's a city called Fortaleza, and there's another one which is called Salvador. Those two cities are in the northeast of the country, and it has one of the nicest beaches and coastal activities that I ever seen. And that first clip that actually startled a few people because the volume was a little loud, I'm sorry for that. It's one of the many events and folklore, and it's a very rich culture. And then in the south, of course, Iguazu Falls, which is very popular, but then there's other places. Curitiba, which I think I had one picture in there, has a glass castle looking botanical garden. I went there one time, but then again, I'm biased because I love plants and everything in ag. So I went over to see, and I was in love with it. And it's places that most people wouldn't think of because it's not very touristic.
On Zoom, we have a question. Nancy asks, what are the racial demographics in Brazil and the main religions there?
Good question. So the racial demographics in Brazil. I believe that over 50% of the population would be considered white because of the colonization of the Portuguese, Germans, Italians. There's a large portion of Japanese, I believe, in the southeast. Is the largest Japanese population outside of Japan. So there is a large portion of the population that has African background, which is some of the states up north. The percentage would be much higher than what I'm talking about in the country. Let's see. And again, I'm sure that a lot more than I'm forgetting or not even mentioning at this point, but it's a very diverse country, and you're going to have people from all over the world for sure. In terms of religion, as far as the time that I was in Brazil, Christianity was probably the biggest one still, as in most Latin American countries. Catholicism probably still the largest one, but there's a lot of Protestants now, and other religions that are growing as well in the country. It is a very spiritual country too. I remember that a lot of the events and the holidays in Brazil are related to some religious saint or event.
As a Brazilian international student, how have you feel with that? Have you found many international Brazilian students? Have you get that culture of you? You feel identified with others? How has been that experience here at Fresno State?
And then again, I have to make another disclaimer. I'm speaking here for myself. So I've met Brazilians before here, and I love every time that I hear somebody speaking Portuguese with a Brazilian accent. I usually try to approach them. I have a classmate of mine in the MBA program that is also from Brazil. So I always like that because it brings back to your place where you grew up. The thing with Brazilians, especially in my experience, is we actually mix, so it's hard to identify unless you're speaking in Portuguese. So if you look at a person and they are speaking in English, sometimes you don't know they are Brazilian because we look all different, and we don't have a lot of there's not a lot of Brazilian events, at least in the Central Valley right now. If I'm Portuguese, for example, I can go to a Portuguese festa all down the Central Valley, but we don't have that with the Brazilian culture, at least not that I know yet. So if there's any Brazilians out there that know that, let me know. But I think we don't, we kind of like blend in through the rest of the culture, at least in California.
I have been in Brazil, and one of the things that is like a vivid memory is when I was in Sao Paulo and I was in the favela area.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wonder why, if it's one of those, in Latin America, one of the most resourceful countries, there is so much people living in the favelas and the conditions, and probably you're familiar with them. What do you think the key factor there in that area?
Yeah, so that was one thing that I debated, including on the presentation or not, which is the fact that Brazil is a very industrialized country now. It's very developed, and it is developing more. It has been in a little bit of an economic crisis, like a lot of different places in the world in the last few years, but for several years it was part of one of the fastest growing economy in the world. The problem that you're bringing up is, I think, is the disparity between the country as a whole, and when we talked about nominal GDP of the country itself versus the quality of life of the majority of the population. So the income disparity might be a little bit too far, and when you look at the country as a general, Brazil it's a developing country, but then you have issues like the poverty, and you have issues with the favela, which, again, I'm from the south, and in the south, a lot of very, very small towns. We didn't have favelas where I was, and I grew up in a farm in the south, so it was even more isolated. So I don't know much about the favelas area, but I think it is something that is due to the disparity, the economic disparity, because when you fly over São Paulo, you have people flying helicopters to go to work to avoid traffic, but you also have people in the favelas who are living below a certain level of growth.
We have another question in the chat that says, in what cities of the US do you think, or do you know, you can find larger Brazilian communities, and if you have been there someday?
Yes, so one of the things that I noticed traveling across the United States is Brazilians love large cities and coastal cities. So if you go to San Francisco, you're going to find Brazilians. I've had this situation where I was at a pizza place in San Francisco, not a Brazilian place, just a normal place, and I had a group of Brazilian visitors that came over, and I was translating to them while they were ordering, and our waiter just came over and started speaking Portuguese. So I was like, oh, he's from Brazil as well, and he noticed that we were having a little bit of difficulties there. So it's very fun to go, and then as soon as we start chatting, then he's like, oh no, there's a lot of Brazilians here. We work in all different sectors of the Bay Area. So if you go to the San Francisco area, to the Bay Area, you're going to find a lot of Brazilians. If you go to LA, there's a lot of Brazilians down there. New York, Boston, the whole East Coast, Florida, and I think it is the fact that we identify with those locations based on where we're from. If you come from Rio, you're gonna look for a place that have the ocean where you can surf, perhaps. But yeah, so larger cities is the place where you're gonna find Brazilians, and some of them in the Fresno area. So. Anything else?
Any other questions here in the audience, or also in Zoom? Feel free to open your cameras and your microphones. Go ahead.
Okay, so our traditional, anyone has any last minute questions? So now we could take our traditional picture. All right. So obrigado, Mauricio. Thank you for making time to present to Coffee Hour your second time. So we really appreciate you being a presenter of Coffee Hour. So open your cameras and let's take a picture with Mauricio. All right, thank you. So today we have finished a little bit early, so I will give you 20 minutes of your time. Thank you for coming to Coffee Hour. See you next week. Next week we're gonna be having two presenters from the study abroad in Italy. So see you next week. Have a good weekend.